Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of DIB Innovators. Today I'm speaking with Kim Crider, founding partner of Elara Nova. Kim has a great background, retired U.S. Air Force Major General across 35 years of leadership across space, cyber, data, and AI. So she also has a lot of great time outside the military with consulting firms. So thanks so much for joining me. This is going to be great. So appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's good. Well, obviously, you've had an incredible career starting at MITRE, as an engineer, and then moving forward to, great leadership and technology and innovation in the Air Force and space. Walk us through your journey and what kind of attracted you towards this segment of, your career.
Okay, well, thank you. So actually, I started as an Air Force active duty officer. And I spent 35 years in the Air Force, even though I did do a stint at MITRE for about 15 of those 35 years. My career had a lot of layers and a lot of overlapping experiences. So 35 years in uniform, 8 of those I was active duty Air Force, and I was in acquisition at that time at Hanscom, started my career there. And in fact, started my career in space acquisition. We were doing space command and control upgrades to Cheyenne Mountain way, way, way back in the day. And that was at Hanscom. That was my very first job. And so I had this bookend experience where at the end of my career, I'm helping to stand up the Space Force. But I started out in acquisition, full-time active duty. After 8 years, I decided to, kind of take a fork in the road and go into the reserves. So 27 of my 35 years I spent as a reservist. I'll tell you, Dave, I had no idea that I was going to be in the Air Force for 35 years, let alone, a reservist, a part-timer for the majority of that time. So one thing just led to another.
I don't think people know you can even do that.
Yeah, right. I mean, I was an oddball for sure. I mean, now it's becoming more of a thing where people are actually, wanting to be more in and out of, full-time, part-time, full-time, part-time. The Space Force is going to this new construct of not having a reserve component, but having full-time, part-time people. And I did that my career. I spent a lot of time on orders full-time, even after I was, separated from the regular Air Force. And then I spent a lot of my time in that 27-year career as a part-timer, just going in for, a few days a month. And in that part-time capacity, that's when I worked for MITRE for 15 years as an engineer. Really enjoyed that, got to do some really cool stuff. And I would take those experiences at MITRE and elsewhere, because after 15 years at MITRE, I decided to do my own thing and do some consulting and work in broader industry. Take those experiences and bring them back into the government military environment, with rapidly emerging technologies. How are things changing? How can we use these technologies in new and interesting ways? And then take those experiences in the military. Here's what the government really needs. Here's what the users are really trying to do, and bring those back out to MITRE, bring those back out to, my civilian world life. Because some of the things that I did in my civilian life were little microcosms of, large organizations that were much, much smaller than, working in the giant Air Force. So there was a lot of crossover experience throughout my career, which made it really interesting and made it really fun. The other thing that was interesting in my journey is because my focus had always been technology. I grew up as an engineer. I grew up as a, technologist. I grew up as a person that was always interested in how do organizations make the best use of technology, whether it's networks, whether it's cloud, whether it's data, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's how do you protect it with cyber. How do you bring those technologies in and start to use them at scale in a way that they can be adopted and they can be employed for great effect? And I found throughout my career, I had the opportunity to drive some of those initiatives and drive some of that technology adoption in a variety of different mission areas. As a IT, comm, cyber, data engineer throughout my career, that's technology that's applicable to every mission area. So I literally worked under every single MAGCOM within the Air Force. I mean, I worked at ACC, I worked at AMC, I worked at PACAF, USAFE, AFSOC, you name it. I mean, I was everywhere. Global Strike, even before there was a global strike, I was working in all these communities, and I loved it. And then at the tail end of my career, the last sort of third of my career, I found myself in the space community. And that's when things got really exciting because space is a completely different animal than the Air Force. But again, needing to leverage technology, needing to go faster, needing to figure out how to innovate, needing to figure out how to adopt it and integrate it, with existing processes and and human activities was always something that excited me along the way.
Yeah, it's really cool if we back up a little bit. I mean, I think, my career was all active duty, and we had the part-timers, if you will, the reserve, the guard, and then like a flying organization. Sometimes that was frustrating, because we're trying to do operations. Like, we got to do it. We need to train. Come on. But I think from the technology segment, if you look at that, seems like a super powerful model to be able to, here's what the civilian side is doing, and seeing how they quickly iterate, which is very different than the government bureaucracy, and to be able to then take the customer side, which, commercial side often lacks. Seems like I haven't really thought about it until you mentioned it, but what a powerful model, in the tech side, and kind of the
Yes. It worked out well for me, for sure. I felt like in many ways I was a translator on both sides, trying to translate what was available and how it could be done better, faster, more effectively. And then on the other side, translating what the real needs were. So it made it a lot of fun, and it made it hard to quit, which is why 35 years later, I was still doing it. So then I did finally retire in 2021, and I went back out into industry, still passionate about this idea of, how do you connect government to industry, industry to industry, take advantage of technologies, take advantage of, new opportunities to be competitive. And I started a consulting company with 3 other of my colleagues. We started Elara Nova. It was inspired in many ways by General John Hyten, who said, there really is such rapid growth in the space marketplace and in the U.S. government needs for space capabilities. And there's not a lot of, consulting capability out there, not a lot of expertise. If it's out there, it's in individual pockets. There's not a mass of capability that's out there that companies, organizations can tap into. And you guys coming out of the space community, you could really come together and start to offer something of value, strategic insights, strategic understanding of where the government is trying to go. Space Force still growing very fast, still trying to, get its feet under itself, that still trying to push out its messages. You could help translate and interpret that into industry, and then help industry figure out how do they really bring those capabilities in the most effective ways. How do they create things that are really going to make a difference? How do they find good industry partners to work with? So that's what we did. We created Elara Nova, and that was 2.5 years ago. Now we're over 120 partners strong, with a deep, deep emphasis on space experience and space ops, space technology, space engineering and acquisition, as well as now a growing interest and growth area in the air domain, with the emergence of, more proliferated UASs, counter UASs, CCAs, all kind of coming in and wanting to integrate with other things that are already there. We're building out an aeronautics and mission systems group with Lieutenant General Abu Nahom, who you know, and we're looking to stand up a cyber data and warfighting comm group as well, because cyber data and warfighting comm cuts across everything too, just as I experienced throughout my career. And we've got the experts. We've got that mass of experts who we can pull together into teams, do that strategic look and that strategic engagement support for industry partners wanting to work with each other, wanting to work with government, wanting to work in the U.S. and outside the U.S., because there's a huge growth on the international market as well, to create competitive advantages.
Yeah. What is the persona of kind of your partners? You mentioned 100 plus. Like, what do you look for when you bring folks into Elara Nova?
Well, first and foremost, every one of the partners that we have some relationship to, which makes it a lot of fun. And also, we have a deep trusted relationship to these folks. I mean, there's 4 founding partners. We've got a broad network of people that we've worked with throughout our career. And we have brought people into the partner portfolio who are people that we know, we've worked with, we trust, and we know that they're really, really good at what they do. So there's that. And that creates a culture from the start, a community from the start, right? You're already working with colleagues that you've worked with in the past or that you've known about throughout your career. And now you're creating immediate synergy and cohesion around the idea that we want to give back. We want to continue to advance the needs of national security and defense. And we want to do this in this new way. So that makes it fun. And then we want to have a broad base of expertise, because there's a lot of different kinds of strategic challenges to be addressed. And we want to have those different perspectives to bring to bear. So we have folks that have spent their careers for the most part in the operations community, folks that have deep intelligence backgrounds from the intelligence community, folks that have spent their careers predominantly in science and technology and doing things as I described. How do you bring technology forward? How do you really vet the technology? Folks that have done acquisition and really understand the acquisition and contracting world of the government. So we bring those different kinds of perspectives together so that we can organize teams in a way that really can help and can think about things from a bunch of different viewpoints.
Yeah, it's a great head start to have a culture that's mission aligned. I mean, that is a challenging thing, that's one of the great stories I hear from folks that leave the military. Is like, I'm missing that. And
Yes.
so you have that just baked into your business strategy. And
Right. We still work at it in the sense that, we're essentially a virtual organization. I mean, our headquarters is in Colorado. That's where we send our mail. That's where we handle our businesses, but everybody's spread everywhere. Right. And so we still work at making sure that people feel a part of this community that we've created. I mean, we have that root of connectivity, but we have social events, we have monthly engagements where we talk about, what's going on in the community, where we're going, what the company's doing, where people are making a difference, what new clients we're bringing on, what successes we've had, what new partners we're bringing on. In fact, we have one of those today. We call them Founder Fridays later on today. So once a month, we do one of these sessions where everybody, it's kind of an all call. Everybody joins in. Sometimes we have guest speakers that come in. It could be somebody that has been on active duty, somebody who just came out, somebody who's a legend of the past. Last time we had General John Jumper joining us, and it was really a lot of fun. So we do that, we try to bring people together so that they feel a part of the team, even though we work in this very virtual manner.
that's awesome. Are you mostly bringing in your partners that are they former military, or are you also bringing in, I'd say industry leaders or titans across?
Yes. The latter. So thanks for bringing that up. Well, we certainly have a lot of folks in our portfolio who have come just out of the military, very current insights and experience from the military and government agencies. We have a lot of folks in our portfolio who may have spent a career in the military and then gone and done amazing things, executive level experiences in industry at very large companies, or started, companies, ran startups, or have been in industry their whole career and just wanted to do something different. We have all of that, which is also very important to us. And we have folks who have, left their prior positions as very senior executives or general flag officers. We have folks that left at, senior levels of middle management, O6s within the military context, or senior directors or division chiefs. We've got a mix. So we've got people that can, really go deep, and we've got people that, stay very, very strategic.
It's a great mix. I love it.
Yeah.
And then just generally to help, listeners that aren't maybe super familiar with consulting. So you're consulting with businesses hire you as well as, military will bring you in. Like, how does that work from kind of contractually so you guys can bring your best value to bear?
Sure. Yes. Primarily, we work with industry partners. So the majority of our clients in our portfolio today are industry, large primes, very large primes, down to very small startups and everything in between. And they bring us in for three main things. The services that we provide are fairly common, even though the scope or the size, scale of the work can vary depending on the nature of the client. But predominantly, it's what we call strategic consulting, where we'll come in, we'll look at where they're going, where they're headed, what they're doing, how does it fit, where's the best way to have their capabilities fit, who should they be partnering with, who should they be engaging, where doesn't it fit, what do they do to evolve that capability to make it more effective, to make it land better, to make it work better within the environment that they're going to try to integrate in, where are they going to have challenges. So we'll do that strategic level deep look at where they're at, where they're trying to go, and how do we help them, and from a capability and a mission alignment, mission utility standpoint. And then we will work with them on an engagement plan. Who, when, how, where should you be engaging and messaging, and what should your messages be? And it's not just messaging and engaging with the government, it's with other industry partners too. So how do you advance this capability? How do people know about it? How do you develop opportunities for yourself? with whom, right? And so we help them build out that engagement plan so that their business development folks can really get in there and be effective. And then we support them through those engagements. We go side by side. Things change. Their strategy may need to change. The environment may change. We stay with our clients and we work side by side with them to make sure that their strategic objectives, their engagement objectives are being met. So we're very much a hands-on kind of an organization. And we've been, sort of quipping lately that we're not a consultancy, we're a resultancy, because we really focus on getting outcomes for our clients.
That's great. It's much better than, a lot of small businesses, probably large too. And I've seen them. You have the good idea fairy advisors. You got to go look at this. Like, well, great. How the hell do I do that?
Right. How do I do it? And then what if that turns out to be not as complete of an opportunity as we thought, So we stay with folks because things evolve and change, as I say.
I love it. Earlier, you mentioned space was very different. So you were the Chief Technology and Innovation Officer for the Space Force that just stood up. Do you have kind of a holy crap moment where you're like, this is a different animal?
Yes. I mean, certainly for me, I didn't grow up in the space community. I was just so impressed when I had the opportunity to work with these, very, very smart, very committed, very well-trained, space professionals, space operators, and to really get a sense of what they do. It's incredible when you really think about it. I mean, as incredible as the things that we're able to do in the other domains, and I know, you're a flyer and we do really cool things in the air domain. And we've been doing that for a long time, and we have a lot of that locked down, right? It continues to evolve and it continues to get really cool. And you can move things around in the air, and we have a lot of great command and control ways to do things. They can always get better, but the pilots are in their planes and they can maneuver and they can, adjust to threats and
the general structure to work within is kind of
pretty well established, right? Not so much in space. I mean, the holy crap moment was when I realized space is freaking hard. It's hard. And it's big, and everything moves around super fast. I mean, 17,000 miles an hour. It's like, zoop, 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 right? And it's so freaking far away. And the only way you're controlling it is through a console, right? And an antenna and an RF connection. I mean, that's how you're controlling this stuff. It's crazy, right? When you think about the physics of space, and you think about the ways in which we've figured out how we're going to control these assets that are now under threat. We can talk more about that, but just the fact that we can get all that stuff up there and stuff blows up, I mean, things don't launch the way that you want them to. The Space Force has done a great job of minimizing mishaps like that. But, space is hard. Launch is hard. Getting stuff up there is hard. And keeping stuff up there is hard. And controlling things up there is hard. So it's just freaking hard. And we always used to I was the Chief Technology and Innovation Officer. I came out of being the Air Force Chief Data Officer. We always talked about this, this notion, which is true, is that we only understand space. We experience space from the data that we receive, through the links up to our systems. We're not up there in space, right? I mean, we're not there looking around, seeing what's going on. There's a handful of astronauts that do that, but that's not what the Space Force does. You're not a pilot in the cockpit looking around. So you really have to rely on a lot of data to know what's happening. And we've only advanced our ability to understand space significantly in the last 5-6 years. So that was pretty much my holy crap moment. Like, there's a lot to figure out here.
Yeah, there's so many, I've had a couple of the guests, just the different capability sets that don't exist on, like, kind of in our atmosphere that you can do out there. It's unknown. You just haven't even poked around at it yet.
That's right. Oh, for certain. In a vacuumless environment, what can you do? Where there's no gravity, what can you do? There's certainly opportunities out there that make it really, really exciting. But there's challenge as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned data, and you've got a background in that. It seems like in the last few years, data has changed, AI maximizing data. What do you think is the one big kind of data push that's really making a change in how, leadership makes decisions in our Space Force, Air Force? But, it seems like there's been a pivot. Where would you kind of focus that?
Yeah, well, there has been a pivot, and that's been very exciting for somebody like me, that more and more leaders across the board are recognizing that there's a lot of value in the data, and if we're not leveraging the data, we are missing an opportunity, and we're likely to fall further and further behind. And the fact that not only do we need to be able to pull the data in and manage the data and be able to access and leverage the data to drive some decision making, we really do need to figure out how to use artificial intelligence to augment those activities that we do with our data and to support us in ways that we couldn't even imagine doing 5 years ago, 6 years ago, or even 10 years ago when I was the Air Force Chief Data Officer. But we were starting to think about those things. And I'm going to tell you a funny story. So when I was the Air Force Chief Data Officer, this was the first Chief Data Office within the Department of Defense. It was the Air Force Chief Data. I don't know how the Air Force came to this decision because I wasn't, in the Pentagon when these decisions were happening, but somehow the Chief Staff of the Air Force, give him a lot of credit, and the Secretary of the Air Force at the time with the other leadership were saying to themselves, we're not taking advantage of data. And we need to be. And the idea of a chief data officer had just started to become a thing in industry. And I was actually working at Harvard. I was doing some work in the higher ed community and helping universities figure out how to leverage data more effectively. So it had just started to become a thing in the commercial industry sectors and in higher ed as well. And the Air Force was thinking about it. And the Air Force was saying, we need a chief data officer. They're looking around and there's nobody, that they really saw that had the kind of experience that they wanted or needed, or was at a leadership level that they thought could run this and get this thing up and running. So I got a call as a reservist. They had seen me, kind of work in different arenas and work with technologies and work with data and come in on my part-time and talk about data and some of the things I was doing at Harvard. And they said, Kim, would you be willing to come back on active duty for a spell and be the Air Force Chief Data Officer? And I said, sure, I'll do that. So I came back and, they put me on orders and off we go. Well, they had no idea what they wanted me to do. We want you to be the Chief Data Officer, but we don't really know what that is. Figure it out. Let's figure it out. Okay, great. Fine. I love it. I've got an open book here. Let's start writing the first chapter. Didn't have a lot of people, didn't have a lot of money, but we're going to figure it out. But the best thing that happened was we had a changeover in the secretariat. We had a new Secretary of the Air Force, Secretary Wilson, and she came in shortly after I took over. And she said to me and to some of the other offices that, were up and running, she said to the Chief Data Office, we're going to have a Corona in the fall, as we always do. And we want a presentation on what the Chief Data Office does and, how you're going to add value. That was a tall order because we had only been around for like a couple months, right?
You don't know.
We don't know. And we're still figuring it out. We're still trying to get people, right? We're still trying to get money. And people, we're getting people, but they're not the best people, but we're working with what we get. And so I said to the team, I said, guys, we're going to go to Corona and we're going to show them what you do with data. And we put together this amazing presentation. I mean, I had enough money that I could go out and bring in some data analysts at the time. This was pre-AI, right? So, but we could go find some data scientists, and we had some data and we had some problem sets. And I said, knowing the importance of a chief data officer is to help people figure out how to use data to solve problems. So let's go get some important problems. One of the important problems of the day was pilot retention. And, how do you keep pilots in the Air Force? And why were we losing, so many pilots? And so we got a bunch of data. We worked with the pilot community, the training community. We had a bunch of data. We worked with the manpower community. We brought in some data scientists. We did a lot of analysis on that data, some modeling. We came to Corona and we did this amazing presentation. And my team was just, shaking in their boots because they just were so nervous about how this was going to come off. But we showed them the results. We showed them, here's what you can do with data. Here's how data can give you insights and help you make decisions on a very important problem that you're trying to solve. And we showed them where the challenges were. We showed it how the data kind of pointed us to what was causing some of the issues. Some of the issues were caused by the fact that there just weren't enough training aircraft for the pilots to, go through training. And people were going off and sitting in jobs waiting to become a pilot, and they were becoming discouraged. So anyway, After our presentation, the secretary says to everybody in the room, who had all been skeptics, by the way, why do we need to waste this money? Why do we need to waste this time? We love General Crider. We've worked with her before, but we're not sure we need this. She looked at everybody in the room and she said, that's exactly why we need a chief data office, right? Is to help us solve important problems with data. And, we had given them some real meaty examples. And so after that, I kept getting phone calls. I got phone calls from all of my colleagues, 4-star commanders saying, all right, let's do this, send people out. We're going to go get some problem solved with data. And that really took us off. That took us off because it really comes down to what are you trying to do with the data? What's the decision that you want to make? And then you work backwards from that. What data do I need? How much data do I need? Where do I get the data? How do I manage the data, et cetera? And that's the turning point, is when people start to realize that there's value here. I can make decisions that's going to help my mission and improve my ability to be effective.
Yeah, that is tough. I still remember, man, it must be 12 years ago, but it was when we had the RPAs, MQ9, MQ4. It was like, what do we do with all this?
Yes.
It's just like, there's so much data out there, but who's doing what with, how do we collect it? What do we do with it? It just sits in some storage somewhere. And
that's right.
And then you put that on space with the amount of data it can provide. Holy cow. So, it's
absolutely,
we got on that.
Absolutely. Well, and to my earlier point, until you actually start to leverage the data, you're really flying blind up there, which is scary, right? You don't know. Don't get me wrong. The Space Force and the industry partners had, long before I showed up, been perfecting some great capability to try to sensing systems that could see, where objects were in space and have models that could determine when there was going to be a conjunction, when something might hit something else and plan to move out of the way. But there was a lot of stuff that was in that whole conjunction analysis process that either got thrown on the floor or, were not necessarily relevant to what you needed to be looking at because you had no spacecraft in that area, right? So you had a lot of data that you ended up sifting through and working with that really wasn't relevant to your needs. So continuing to work that problem, continuing to get better data and better modeling and better understanding of the space domain so that you can see where the threats are in space, where things are in space, what might be threatening, has been a number one priority for every U.S. Space Command commander since U.S. Space Command stood up, and for the Space Force and every commander before that, is we've got to understand what's going on in the domain.
Yeah, domain awareness. Well, it is fun. As you mentioned this, this became relatively apparent to me as I can, knuckle dragging fighter pilot. The leaders that were successful had a genuine intuition on how to look at just disparate, sets of data, if you will, but not collected, not processed, but they just had an ability to process it. We need to go this direction. This is, in the air, that's a little different, but now data, and the fighters are very different. But then I got over the software side and the commercial. Holy cow. The way you can use data was mind blowing to me. I never even thought of that in my, 20 plus years in the Air Force of how to use data.
There's a lot to be said for intuition, right? And experience and professional judgment and all that. When I showed up as the chief data office and we had nothing to go with, nothing to go on. When I showed up as the chief technology innovation office and they never did that before either. We had nothing to go on. That was just all gut instinct. Okay, here's step number one. But, when you're thinking about, how you're going to operate effectively in a very complex and changing operational environment, the more data you have, the safer, the more effective you're going to be. I'll give you one other quick story. I used to love to tell this story to my Air Force colleagues. The Air Force has, for the longest time, tried to figure out how to collect data on fuel consumption for aircraft. And by and large, most aircraft, you probably know this, especially big, heavy aircraft, they go out very heavy and they come back heavy. Why? Because they don't want to run out of gas, right? It's not a good thing. So you always plan ahead. You always plan for more. Well, what happens? They weren't collecting really good data on how much fuel they actually needed for different kinds of missions. There were these little handwritten notes, literally handwritten notes. Here's how much fuel we took out. Here's how much fuel we came back with. And some of that would get lost. It would never get recorded, et cetera. Well, once they started to actually put that into a format that they could start to work with, and we helped them as the chief data, one of our chief data office, they started to realize that, we're going out really heavy. We're coming back really heavy on a lot of different types of missions and sorties. And guess what's happening? A lot of aircraft are going into the depot for landing gear problems. There's a correlation there that they never saw. Why are so many aircraft unavailable due to landing gear? It's because they're too heavy. And this became a real light bulb that went off. And so you start to make those correlations and those connections, and now you can start to have much better predictive analytics about what's going to impact your mission.
Yeah. No, it's powerful. I'm glad we're getting to the point where we're starting to, figure that out.
Right.
I just had another podcast that's interesting. So in a fighter squadron, we have a schedule. So you have little magnetic pucks and you're managing 40 pilots, however many airplanes you have, very much dependencies on many different things. And there'll be 7 officers sitting in this room, 12 hours a day, changing things, taking inputs, and then weather would happen and redo the whole week. To this day, I think that this company is now starting to progress that, but just automating it all, taking these models and putting it in and optimizing and getting feedback loop. And it's like, you look at some of the pilot problems is I'm tired of not flying. All I'm doing is this admin stuff. It's like, this has so many layers of just being good with data, tracking it, automating things, models that help you. And that's just a very small micro segment of how we can use it.
But it wasn't that long ago, that, and in some circles, we're still doing these, very manual processes. And the technology with AI, with Agentic AI, or and autonomous capabilities that can do more things for you, is making it even more easier.
Yeah. So you are now working, and you've worked with across the Space Force, Air Force, other services, different commands, combatant commands, international partners. What do you see in space ops, just shifting a little bit to space, like the biggest capability gap that we need to get better at?
I mean, for space in particular, I talked a little bit about domain awareness. That's still a huge challenge because it's a very vast domain and there's a lot about it that we don't understand and we don't have enough sensing. And that's why we're leveraging commercial capabilities more and more, because we only have so much military sensing capability. So we have to get more and more commercial and figure out ways to pull all that data together and figure out how to use it. So domain awareness is still a big capability gap. But right after that, it all flows, right? Right after that and with that is command and control. How do we really command and control all of these assets very effectively? Because if we're going to do, very maneuverable space operations, we have to know how we're going to command and control these things. And so that's still a huge capability gap. And how are you going to coordinate that, from a joint fires perspective, from a coalition perspective? How are you going to coordinate your command and control activities across air and space, or air and ground, or U.S. and coalition partner in the space, for the space domain? That's a capability gap. There's a lot of efforts trying to fix that, but we still have a long way to go to get that done. And so we got to continue to work that. There's a lot of interest in doing that, and there's a lot of people putting some money behind that, but we have a long way to go to get that done.
It's the ocean and you're trying to boil it. How do you break down to figure out, what are you and your partners sharing with your, customers and the, DOD and just really anyone that's in space? How do you tackle this?
Right.
What are the biggest challenges and how are you guys getting on this?
Yeah. Well, one of the ways that we really encourage folks to tackle it collectively, government and industry working together, is through experimentation. We really do have to continue to have, as much as possible, live prototypes, operational prototypes. We need a test and training environment. We need test and training infrastructure. We need to have infrastructure that can model and sim these capabilities. So to the extent that organizations can do some of that for themselves and think through, how is this going to work? How's this going to integrate in? How's this going to perform in the environment? That's going to make them more effective, that's going to make their solution more powerful to those that are ultimately going to have to use it and integrate it in. That may not be something that an investor will think about, but that's something that we think about, right? I mean, investors are putting a lot of money behind these companies because they're coming up with some great ideas with some really phenomenal tech. But we want them to think about, well, how is this going to be used? How's it going to integrate? How's it going to work in the environment? So figuring out how to get an operational prototype pulled together, how to do some realistic testing, how to do some modeling in sim. Those are the things that we think are going to make a big difference.
When you speak of capital, testing, failure, quick experimentation, it's expensive.
It is.
And the government, is in a fiscally challenged environment. How do you see private capital supporting this, and how is that? And I know it continually shifts. Defense tech is getting more money, but how do you see this, continuing to emerge as we move forward in that, private-public partnership?
Sure. Well, the good news is that the cost of launch has gone significantly down. The cost of building spacecraft has gone significantly down. So that's helped the whole process of getting more things into space. And in getting more things into space faster, we're getting more things into space that are experimental, right? We have more opportunity because it's costly to send something up. It's not as costly to try a launch. I mean, you see SpaceX, doing multiple tests on very, very exquisite technologies, but they're testing these things out and they don't always work. Right? They don't always work, but that's a really important part of the process. And it's not as expensive as it is. It's not as expensive as it used to be. So there's this mindset shift that has occurred, and commercial industry is driving it, which is to say we have to go faster. We have to be able to innovate more effectively. And the only way we're going to do that is fail fast. The only way we're going to do that is try things out. And some of these things will fail. And that's okay. And in fact, we'll learn a lot more when they do, because we're collecting data about what's happening all throughout that process. So those dynamics have helped. Things are less kind of leaning in to taking more of those chances, more of those steps towards experimentation and learning.
Yeah. So do you see any biggest, I would say, dangerous assumptions in this new environment that leaders are making? What would be because data is new, some people just accept it. Are there any things that you think we need to be aware of moving forward from our leadership perspective?
I mean, I think that there's still the propensity, the tendency to, in the desire to go fast, it's what's the next new shiny object? What's the next thing? How do I take advantage? Oh, this is really cool, right? I'm just going to go after this, and this is going to give me some sort of a panacea advantage. I mean, that's human nature. And so we have to be really careful of that, especially because we need things to be able to work cross-domain. We need things to work multi-orbit. We need things to work in ways that give us more resiliency. We need things to be cyber protected. We can't just jump to solutions, right? We need to be able to think through the entire system and how's it going to work. And we need to make sure that we're investing in infrastructure, as I talked about earlier, that's going to support test and training and integration. Those are things that not everybody, always wants to spend money on. So while we love our shiny objects, while we love our platforms, and they're really great when they do the thing that we need them to do, we need them to do those things, deliver those effects in the context of a larger multi-domain integrated environment. So we've got to think through how all that's going to work.
Absolutely. And then in advising, companies, do you see anything on both ends of the spectrum where, because technology advancement and dollars are coming at it fast, they got to make decisions where they're either assuming they have to make investments that you've seen you shouldn't be making that one, or ones that they're not making that you commonly see you have to put money here?
Well, I think on the you have to put money here, I would go back to cyber. And I think that just like we've seen a shift in mindset along the lines of data and how to use data more effectively and the value of it, we've certainly seen a shift in the importance of cybersecurity, cyber protection. I mean, holy smokes. I mean, there have been some serious wake-up calls, right? February 2022, the Viasat attack, right? That basically Russia took down, a number of modems that kept the network up and running for satellite communications provided by Viasat. Well, when that happened, that showed us a couple of things. One, that these capabilities are very, very vulnerable and they can go down fast. And when they go down fast, a lot of things shut down, not just military activities, but the Viasat attack impacted, just general public users from France to Italy to Hungary and Ukraine, right? And it impacted hospitals and it impacted energy systems. So just this interconnection of space-based capabilities and the cyber domain, the Viasat attack showed us that this stuff can go down. We're very vulnerable to it. And when it goes down, it's a prelude to a kinetic attack. We always used to talk about the first shot's going to be made in the cyber domain. Well, the Viasat attack proved that was absolutely true because it was the prelude to, the follow-on incursion. But then we also saw the ripple effect of how it impacted so many other non-military, economic, social activities and how we're so dependent on space capabilities just as a world community. So that was a big wake-up call. And again, causing more and more people to think about this. Another big wake-up call was SolarWinds. SolarWinds was the big wake-up call that said, we're going to have, our supply chain is fragile and it's vulnerable. And the adversaries are going to look for those vulnerable opportunities to insert something in the supply chain that can then proliferate. And that's exactly what happened with the SolarWinds attack. So that was a big wake-up call. And then the third one that I like to talk about is Colonial Pipeline. That was the big wake-up call on critical infrastructure and ransomware. And so those kinds of events, have caused folks to, sort of sit back and go, I have got to make sure I'm spending money on this. I have got to make sure that we have a way to understand what our supply chain is, visibility in our supply chain, zero trust environment, testing, monitoring, understanding the patterns of life, understanding where we may have threats and anomalies to our capabilities. And again, in that space system, if anything goes down, a lot of things can get impacted.
Let's come back to that. How about places they're spending money where you're like, yeah, it's not necessarily required, like overinvestment and things. You're like, man, just chill.
I mean, I think, again, I would go back to this notion of, are we spending too much on the platform and not enough on how it's going to work in the environment? And we still tend to want to have, the platform versus thinking through all the things that are needed to execute the mission most effectively. I mean, there's been debates for years. How many of those, specific fighter aircraft do you really need before you know?
This is usually A-10.
Right?
Is it a capability that we need, or is it a platform we need to deliver something?
Right. And the capability has to be an integrated capability, and in the space environment, these are basically, floating computers in space. You need a number of them, and you need them to be able to integrate with other things, military and commercial, working well together. And you can only afford so many of the thing, right? So you've really got to think about how many of those specific things do you need, and then how much money are you going to put towards the network, the integration, the data transport, the movement of information, the protection of it, the command and control. I mean, all the other things that we talked about, we have to be able to do that.
Yeah. Well, I'll go back a little bit to your supply chain and just where investment should be made in kind of the cybersecurity, both that, on the IT and OT side. I'm a small company, small-ish, I'll say 200 people, 150 people. I'm trying to make my widget. I'm working through the valley of death to get it, try to get it to be contract, get investments. Or maybe I'm bigger and I'm just like, look, if the government wants me to do it, they'll pay for it. How do we incentivize the supply chain and everyone in this ecosystem? Because, Russia, I mean, they might, SolarWinds, they did, but generally, China, they're going to attack the smaller companies, proliferate through the supply chain using that vulnerability. How do we get companies to make that investment? Where does that money come from?
Well, I mean, I think the government has gotten, more and more explicit about asking tough questions, requiring companies to be, very clear on where, who's in their supply chain, where are they getting their components, if they're getting their components for certain critical systems outside of the U.S., who, when, where, how, if they're getting their components from places that we don't find very savory, you're not going to get a contract. I mean, just flat out, you're not even going to get a small business innovative research, sort of opportunity. So the government has been pretty clear and very focused on making sure that the supply chain risk can be managed. And our industry's figuring it out. I mean, industry can't afford it. As expensive as it can be to do those sort of things, to have total asset visibility, total supply chain visibility, really work your supply chain. If you have a SolarWinds situation and you don't have the investment to recover from that, you're bankrupt.
Yeah.
So you've got to figure this out.
Well, and I bet SolarWinds is still, we haven't identified all the breaches from SolarWinds. They are still sitting in systems. I am highly confident.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much vulnerability out there. And so you just can't take for granted anything that you're working with. I mean, we know that. We know not to share our data. We know not to, there's a lot of things that generally we are now, general public, more knowledgeable on. But I think you just can't take for granted the fact that that everything out there is got some vulnerability in it.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, some of the things just baffle my mind is a threat, because a lot of times with the government you got to prove to me we're really getting breached at a certain rate. But a lot of these breaches, especially in critical instances, they bury themselves, they migrate, they get into software. They're not going to do anything. It's not like a ransom. Okay, give us money. They sit there,
right?
Until it blows up. And so the assumption of prove me I need this is too late.
Well, and fortunately, that mindset is shifting. I mean, I heard a lot of that in my day, but I don't hear it as much anymore. It's more about show me what you're doing to protect this. Of course, we have to manage our costs. Of course, we want to, invest in things smartly, but I'm not hearing as much of the prove to me.
That's good. That's good. All right. We'll finish up with kind of one more question. So looking ahead 10 years, if you could give one piece of actionable advice to a defense leader who wants to just keep driving tech disruption, what would that be? Because that's the world you're living in right now.
Yeah. I would say my advice is do it. Tech disruption is where the opportunity is. But when you're going to get behind tech disruption, make sure you're focused on how that new technology is going to be adopted. So you're focusing on adoption as much as you are on disruption, because while you want things to kind of shift in a new direction and give you a new advantage, if the rest of and I'll just call it, big ass system doesn't have a way to catch up, doesn't have a way to take advantage of that disruption, it's going to fly out in front of everything, but nothing else will be able to. You won't get the scale. You won't get the scale if the larger environment can't use it, people can't adopt it, people can't figure out how to integrate it in. Disruption and adoption have to be thought about hand in hand. And that's why I think that with a lot of this new technology that's coming out and, things that are very disruptive, what ends up being the most valuable, what ends up being the kinds of things that, ultimately give you the most return on your investment are those fundamental, again, I'll go back to fundamental infrastructure things. As disruptive and innovative and exciting as AI is, it's nothing if we don't have good data centers. It's nothing if we don't have, strong power capability to keep those data centers cooled and up and running, right? So we've seen some really cool AI that can do cool things, but if you want to use that at scale, you've got to have this foundational infrastructure to be able to do it really, really well. And then you have to have a lot of other, training, testing, evaluation, people that can work effectively with AI, try AI, work side by side with AI. I mean, all of that is the cultural aspects of adoption. So disruption is great. Do it. Lean in, always. Try to break through, but focus also on adoption and the fundamentals along the way.
Well, great insights. Well, Kim, I'm so impressed. For those that hadn't heard Kim before, I mean, your perspective, your insights are amazing. Super excited for Aleranova. I love what you're doing. I became aware of you, about a year ago, and the things that you're doing, the people you're bringing in, the partnerships and your approach to helping out industry and government, is fantastic. So thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for your service. And I look forward to seeing you around. But if folks want to get more information on Elara Nova, maybe need some help for their company, how best would they do that?
Yeah, they can just go to our website, Aleranova.com. They can, ask a question at our info@aleranova.com. Somebody will reach right back out to them and get in touch. They can always reach any one of us founding partners on LinkedIn. We get a lot of contacts that way. We'd love to get that. We'd love to hear from folks. We would love to help anybody out there that's got great capability and they're trying to figure out a way to bring it in to deliver advantages for our national security and defense of our nation or that of our allies and partners. That's what we're all about. And we want to find those great companies that want to help do that too.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, Kim, and I look forward to seeing you at the next event.
Thanks, Otto. Appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.